Be featured on ILTV and show the world what you have to offer. We broadcast from Israel to around the globe, so get yourself camera ready.
Hello and welcome to ILTV's Israel Daily. I'm Aaron Porras. And coming up in today's newscast, Israel-based spy company NSO Group embroiled in controversy again over the abuse of their Pegasus software. Meanwhile, Prime Minister Naftali Bennett walking back his previous statements about freedom of prayer atop the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. And finally, Israel's airports under threat of closure again. Stay tuned for the latest from the COVID cabinet. We begin tonight with the spyware story that unfortunately just keeps giving. 17 major international news organizations, including the AFP, Al Jazeera, the Washington Post, The Guardian, Le Monde, Haaretz, and the PBS Frontline, now releasing a disturbing joint report entitled The Pegasus Project, named for the Pegasus spyware developed by the private Israeli NSO Group. And the investigative report into the leak from NSO now alleging that over 50,000 activists, journalists, politicians, and more were identified as possible targets for hacking by NSO's various clients. Joining me with the details is Senior Cyber Head of the Policy and Technology Program at the Abba Eban Institute at IDC Herzliya and Senior Researcher at Tel Aviv University's Blavatnik Interdisciplinary Cyber Research Center, Daniel Cohen. Daniel, thank you so much for being with us today. Now, can you break down some of the details of this leak and the recent report?
Okay, thanks. First of all, it's not new information. What is new is the leak itself. As you said, 50,000 phone numbers on that leak. Now, only a small amount of them was actually checked to see if there's any correlation to the Pegasus spyware software of NSO Group. And it seems like there is correlation at least of half of it. And from our understanding, this leak also contains many numbers of journalists, of activists, but also politicians and government officials. So this is really maybe a change from what we saw in the past when there was a revelation of infected phones that were mainly activists, human rights activists, and journalists.
How can these hacks be maybe traced back to any particular NSO client?
That's a tough question from the technological side. Usually what we saw was reverse engineering on the phone, monitoring to see if there's any infection on the phone, and then trying to trace it to the Pegasus software or other software. NSO is not the only company in this business. Now, to correlate from that to trace back who was behind it, it's hard. Then you need to go for a different approach, mainly to understand domestically if the target was a threat to the government or to the law enforcement in that country. And if so, that can be the possible organization that is behind the infection of the phone. But it's really hard to do it from the technological side.
All right, now you mentioned that of the 50,000 potential targets listed in the leak, you said that only a fraction have actually been checked and that they were found to have correlations with the Pegasus software or to correlate with that leak. Were there checks on phone numbers that it turned out that they were not hacked, or was it basically everyone we checked, everyone that was checked on that list, they found, yeah, they were hacked by Pegasus?
Until now, from the report, it seems like a bit over 50%, meaning you can see if you can calculate the bigger number of the 50,000, but we can't really know for sure. For now, the leak is only a potential number of people that were infected on their phones by Pegasus, but we don't know it for sure for now. We don't have any more further information regarding it. So we can only speculate that it's about half of them at least.
All right, well, we know that this is a developing story, that more information about this investigation, the Project Pegasus, about the leak is going to come out. I hope to have you back with more when that happens. Daniel Cohen, thank you so much.
Thanks.
Moving on, Prime Minister Naftali Bennett appearing to backpedal statements from Sunday, seemingly in support of Jewish prayer on the Temple Mount. This after clashes erupting on the Mount over reports of illegal acts of Jewish worship at Judaism's holiest site on earth. Israeli Prime Minister Naftali Bennett today clarifying that he only meant to codify freedom of visitation to the Temple Mount during comments made earlier this week. Bennett apparently misspeaking on Sunday when saying that both Jews and Muslims will have their freedom of worship protected on the Temple Mount, the site of the first and second Jewish temples, the holiest place in Judaism, and the site of the Al-Aqsa Mosque complex, believed to be the third holiest site in Islam. And aside from hinting at the overturning of a decades-held status quo, Bennett's comments especially sparking outrage as they came on the Tisha B'Av holiday, where hundreds of Jewish pilgrims ascended to the Mount, some of whom were seen praying or even singing Israel's national anthem. Non-Muslims regularly visit in pre-scheduled and organized tours, especially Jews on Tisha B'Av, as it's the anniversary of the destruction of both the first and second temples that were built there. But while all religions are allowed to visit in small groups, under an agreement with the Islamic Waqf which manages the site, only Muslims are allowed to pray there. It's no surprise, then, that Palestinian and Islamic Waqf officials are calling the Jews' visit an extremist provocation. Even the Islamist Ram party within the coalition is claiming that, quote, the Al-Aqsa Mosque in its 35 acres is solely the property of Muslims and no one else, end quote. The party adding that Jewish presence on the Mount could provoke further violence like that seen in May between Israel and Hamas. It's unclear, however, what particular reason led Bennett to walk back his statements. The right to Jewish prayer atop the Mount is hotly debated even among Jewish and rabbinic scholars, some of whom argue that prayer should be forbidden until the third Temple of Legend is erected. Meantime, Israel's President Herzog and Foreign Minister Yair Lapid condemning the baseless hatred and divisions between Jews following the forceful disruption of prayers at an egalitarian section by the Kotel, or the Western Wall, on Sunday. Lapid, for one, claiming in a tweet that the Western Wall belongs to every stream of Judaism and will be a place where every Jew feels at home. In an act of brazen disrespect, a cohort of far-right Orthodox Jews, mostly teenagers, charging into an area by the Western Wall Saturday night that has been set aside for pluralistic prayer. The extremists then cursing and screaming at egalitarian worshipers who gathered there for a conservative prayer service, even installing a partition to segregate the area by gender. Footage from the scene showing conservative leaders pleading with the youths to respect the sanctity of the site and the day, but to no avail. Then, making things worse, the violent disruption taking place on one of the Jews' holiest day, Tisha B'Av, a holiday which Jewish tradition ironically teaches us that the ancient temples were destroyed due in part to senseless hatred between Jews. Meanwhile, the Haaretz Daily reporting that these activists are members of a far-right organization named Liba, which has been organizing daily events at the site, all in efforts to trample plans by the new government to implement a year's frozen deal that would see the pluralistic plaza permanently established. Now, in other news, the Palestinian Authority is in trouble as protests on the street are increasing. Demonstrators calling for investigation into activist Nizar Banat's death while condemning the continued arrest of political dissidents and critics like activist Issa Amro. Meanwhile, the PA even arresting a Palestinian singer this morning whose entire crime was performing for Palestinian workers at an Israeli factory. So what's going on in the PA? Could these protests be any danger to Ramallah, and how does Israel and the U.S. fit in? Joining us with the answers is ILTV's Asaf Nissan. Asaf, thanks so much for coming in again.
Thank you, as always.
All right, now what's been going on regarding the investigation with Nizar Banat?
So the investigation with Nazir Banat.
Nazir, I'm so sorry, yeah.
So the investigation itself with Nazir Banat has been going on slowly and almost halted by the PA. While they're trying to fix everything behind the scenes and outside the courtroom, the official release of the cause of death has not been revealed yet.
So why isn't it releasing the cause of death? I mean, they are clearly against the protests.
So what's been going on behind the scenes is they've been trying to reach out to the elders of the tribe, to the elders of the family, trying to create some sorts of outside deal from the courts in order to prevent the story to go into official investigation and thus going into courts.
So how has this affected the PA's image, especially with respect to the residents in the Palestinian Authority?
So, I mean, it didn't worsen the image the PA is suffering from already, because it's been suffering from a negative image for the past 10 to 15 years almost. It's been caused by pretty much a feeling of corruption, of anti-relation to the people, thinking only of themselves. But the only reason that this is on the table is because the alternative is also Hamas, and this scares people all around in the end of the day.
So that actually brings me to my next question, because if we're talking about Hamas potentially taking over, at least becoming a popular choice increasingly in the West Bank, this has been cited many times by security and defense establishments in Israel and the United States as being against the interests of the region. So is Israel now in a position where they have to support the Palestinian Authority?
Israel has supported the PA behind the scenes the entire time. I mean, we're still giving them payments. We're still helping out humanitarian-wise. Everything we can do in order to keep the PA stable for us is more than anything. Especially if you see remarks done by the Minister Isawi Frej from Meretz, who actually said that while the PA is facing a bad alternative for us, which is Hamas, Israel should continue supporting the PA no matter what.
All right, Asaf Nissan, thanks for your insights.
Thank you so much.
In other news, the Jewish and Israeli relationship with Christian evangelicals has a long history, which today is one of vigilant support. But following the recent uptick of clashes with terror groups in Gaza and a change in Israel's administration, these same ties can sometimes seem more delicate. So, what's the state of relations today? Here to break it all down is pro-Israel Christian advocate Lily Sironi. Lily, thanks so much for coming in today.
Absolutely, thank you.
It's my pleasure. All right, so I have to ask you, let's begin with the Israeli-Jewish Christian evangelical relationship, really. How did it come to be so strong, especially in the recent century?
Yeah, so basically what we see today as modern evangelicals, that history goes all the way back to Martin Luther and the Reformation. Even though in his later years he was a pretty intense anti-Semite, in the beginning his Reformation allowed Christians around the world to actually read the Bible, which is important because before that, whatever the interpretation of the priests were, because the Bible was not in the common language, was kind of taken as fact. And a lot of that was anti-Semitism about, how the Jews are trying to control society, all these terrible anti-Semitic tropes that we hear still today. And so really with that freedom of information came Christians reading the word and realizing that it's all about God's faithfulness to the Jewish people. And so then you've seen this steady growth in Christians who read their Bible, know that God is still faithful to his people, and we as Christians should also be friends of Israel.
All right, so now in the recent flare-up in May between Israel and Hamas in Gaza, there was a sharp rise in anti-Semitism around the world. And with that, the Jews often have been reporting feeling very alone in the face of that rise. Of course, Christian supporters were there in large numbers, but what do you say about you could call it blind faith or blind support for Israel?
I think that Christians definitely have to do a better job of being vocal about their support for Israel. I think the other side is incredibly loud on the world stage, and I think Christians need to do a better job of educating themselves on the issues, making sure they know what they believe from a biblical point of view, and that they're not afraid to share it in a public space. That's the important part, is making sure that their Christian voice is heard for the Jewish people, and Jews know that they have Christian friends.
Now, recently it's been reported that the support for Israel, for the Jewish people, amongst evangelical Christians, amongst particularly the younger generation of evangelical Christian community, has actually waned. What are these reports accurate, and what are the causes?
I would say they are accurate. I think a lot of young Christians are, entering into very intense college campus atmospheres where they're being just inundated with many different social justice issues, all sorts of crises going on around the world, and the issue of Israel gets lost for them, even as Christians. And so I think they're also intimidated by what's being taught on college campuses, just a lot of anti-Semitism and anti-Israel rhetoric, and they don't have the education to back that up.
So have they turned more towards that misinformation, or are they maybe just a little bit more silent or reluctant to speak out?
I think it's both. I think they're reluctant to speak out if they don't feel well informed enough, and therefore they may as well be anti because we don't hear their voices, right? But I think there are some that are kind of buying into what's being taught on their campuses, and that's a big problem for Christian Friends of Israel.
All right, well, I think you've given a lot of people all over the world a lot to think about. Lily, thank you so much for coming in.
My pleasure.
All right, now speaking of foreign relations, Israeli Foreign Minister Yair Lapid traveling to Morocco next month to inaugurate the new Israeli diplomatic mission in the capital of Rabat. And Lapid will be the first Israeli minister to visit Morocco since the two nations re-established diplomatic ties in part of a three-way deal with the United States last December. Though while sources say that Lapid is hoping to turn the mission in Rabat into a fully fledged embassy, for now this isn't the case. In December, Morocco stopped short of completely normalizing relations, preferring instead to mutually open diplomatic liaison offices. Meanwhile, newly sworn-in Israeli President Isaac Herzog holding a meeting this week with Morocco's Foreign Affairs Minister Nasser Bourita, the two discussing various political challenges and ways that the two countries can continue developing ties between themselves and the other Gulf Arab states. Now, new systems being put in place every day, yet coronavirus cases are still rising. So with at least 10% of new infections coming in from abroad, health officials are reportedly weighing another closure of Ben Gurion International Airport. Of course, as with anything in this pandemic, nothing is set in stone. Hannah Rifkin with the details.
Starting with some good news, it looks like vaccines are still pretty effective against coronavirus. The number of serious cases still at least 61. But only one of these people are both vaccinated and under the age of 60, and 0 fully vaxxed people under 50 are in serious condition. As for the more troubling news, renewed restrictions being laid out domestically, and if COVID infections continue to spike, Israelis may also soon be banned from taking leisure trips abroad again. This as over 22,000 people reportedly took off from Tel Aviv's Ben Gurion Airport on Sunday alone, directly in defiance of government pleas to avoid any unnecessary international trips, especially as some 10% of those who return come back infected with the virus. Hebrew media reports on Sunday, quoting health ministry officials as weighing the options on various new closures and restrictions, including potentially requiring all returnees to self-isolate for a minimum of 7 days, instead of the current 24-hour quarantine for people coming back from countries with low infection rates. Also, for the sake of quarantine enforcement, police will be allowed to verify individuals' location through an SMS system. This as per Prime Minister Naftali Bennett's instructions, and the system would be regulated by the Public Security Ministry and the Attorney General's Office. Meantime, Israel's Do Not Travel list may soon be expanded, and vaxxed or not, the ban on tourists will be extended beyond August 1st, when the ban was originally set to be lifted. Health Minister Nitzan Horowitz clarifying, however, that the intention is not to close the airport completely unless absolutely necessary, and that if the decision is eventually made, travelers will be given advance notice to change plans before the shutdown takes effect.
Now, by now, you're probably familiar with Ulpan Or through our newscast. But today, I'm proud to invite them back to talk about their newest program, specifically geared towards kindergartners and aptly called Balagan e-curriculum for kindergartners. And here to tell us more about it, of course, is co-founder and CEO of Ulpan Or, Yoel Ganor, and Gvira Abed, a senior kindergarten and school teacher in the United States. Thank you both so much for coming in today.
It's a pleasure to be here with you again.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, and making the trip, of course, all the way from San Diego.
Absolutely.
Gosh. All right, so Yoel, I'm actually going to start with you, though. What is this program and what's unique about it?
Okay, actually, Aaron, we wanted to generate a paradigm shift with our program, introducing it to kindergartens. Let me ask you, do you remember as a kid your math lessons? How were they?
Oh, I
Did you
do,
have
actually.
fun? Yeah?
They were not fun. Okay. I do remember them.
Okay, so what we had in front of our eyes is what I read from the biography of Albert Einstein. You know, there was a time in his life where he taught math in school. And what's interesting about it is that when the school principal used to listen behind the door, he was amazed. There was a lot of laughter and action. He couldn't understand what was going on in a math lesson there. So what happened is Einstein invented a system where you had to solve a mathematical equation, and there was a mysterious Mr. X, and the kids had to find this Mr. X, and there was a lot of action and laughter. So when we thought about introducing a new program to kindergartens, we thought, okay, let's follow Einstein's footsteps. And what we did is we remembered that, and what we said to ourselves, Orly and I, let's have this paradigm shift and introduce a program that we called Balagan, which means in Hebrew, came to the kindergarten, but it also has another connotation. Balagan, you know, it's a Russian, Turkish, Yiddish word. It's like making a mess. That's what we wanted exactly. That's exactly what we wanted to achieve in the kindergarten. Okay, a mess where kids would be engaged and laugh and have a lot of fun. So that's the purpose of this program.
Okay, so now how has this program proven itself so far, and how are the children absorbing it?
Well, the program proved itself as a great success. And I think the best way to demonstrate it is through a story. Well, we call this student Daniel, and he was my student in the past year. And he was very anxious about learning Hebrew. He would not raise his hand, he would not participate. But we use senses as much as we can. We learn through the senses. And that was the best way to lure Daniel into the program. And for him, the Hebrew games and the art activities was the best way. And he was really excited about learning. Within a month, he started participating in a class. And by the end of the semester, he asked if he can lead a class in a conversation. We do look at the Hebrew as an all program compared to what we did in the past that was teaching the letters and teaching the sounds.
Very formulaic.
Yes.
Sure.
Absolutely.
So it's a much more natural way to learn language.
Yes.
So the program is already run in several kindergartens, of course, including the one where you work. How do you see the success of Ulpan Or's program in comparison to others that you have used?
Well, you know, as you say, the proof is in the pudding. Mm-hmm. So by the end of the year, the students are able to lead a conversation in Hebrew. They can recognize the letters, opening sound, vocabulary that relates to the letters. But it's much more than that. The kids are really, the authentication of the program make the kids feel that they're part of the Israeli culture. Mm-hmm. They love the Hebrew songs and the stories. And in the past year and a half, because of the pandemic, the fact that the program is based online and you can teach it online or in person or hybrid really contribute to the success of the program. And the kids just loved it. But I think the most important component of the program is the fun. The kids love Hebrew. They're happy, they're joyous, and they're so much excited to learn Hebrew.
All right, well, any program to make language learning fun and more intuitive it sounds like a very successful program to me. I know my Spanish lessons could have been a little bit more fun. Maybe I'd speak Spanish today. In any case, Yoel, thank you so much for coming in. Gvira, thank you so much for coming in.
Toda rabba.
Thank you. Toda rabba.
Thank you.
All right, our final topic tonight coming straight from above, literally. 12 Israeli daredevils accomplishing an exhilarating feat, soaring way past the country's previous skydiving record for 10 linked people. Video of the dive showing the parachutists forming a head-down pre-approved structure while plummeting at over 275 kilometers per hour or over 170 miles per hour, and setting a new precedent for aspiring Israeli athletes in the process. Now, according to judges, the structure is complete when each participant reaches their exact predetermined position and a full connection can be seen with the right hand. Of course, Israelis involved in the world record as well. In fact, Sharon Hernoi, coach of the Israeli skydiving squad, was one of the 164 participants who broke the world record for the number of linked divers in Chicago in 2015. And Arik Kaplan, president of the Eilat Association, which organizes many non-Olympic athletics, notes that Israel is eager to remain at the forefront of the sport. All right, that's it for today's news. Today's exchange rate is 3.3 shekels to the American dollar and 2.58 shekels to the Canadian dollar. And finally, for the latest updates and news from ILTV, please like ILTV on Facebook, follow us on Instagram, and subscribe to our YouTube channel as well as to our newsletter at iltv.tv. I'm Aaron Porras. Be well. Thank you so much for watching.